Thank you for watching our candidates discussion for the riding of Burnaby North-Seymour. My name is Paul Holden and I'm the President and CEO of the Burnaby Board of Trade. Before we start, I'd like to take a moment to recognise that we're on the traditional homeland of the Hunka, Meenam and Skohomish speaking people, and to extend our appreciation for the opportunity to hold the event here today. As the Chamber of Commerce for Burnaby, the Burnaby Board of Trade stands at the cross-section of where business and community meet. And we work to foster and support a thriving, successful and sustainable community for businesses, employers and people. To help our community get to know the local candidates in the federal election better, the Burnaby Board of Trade is holding these discussions for each of the 3 Burnaby ridings, which are being shared to everybody within our community. So we've extended invitations to all of the candidates in each riding to participate, and I'm pleased to be joined right now by Terry Beach, representing the Liberal Party, Jim Hanson, representing the New Democrats, Brad Nickerson, representing the People's Party, and Kelsey Shane, representing the Conservative Party. If Peter Dolling is able to join us, he was hoping to, we'll obviously welcome him as and when he's able to join. So welcome everybody and thank you for being here. So to kick things off, I'll just go through and remind everybody of the guidelines for today's discussion. Each candidate will be given 2 minutes to provide opening remarks, and we'll do that alphabetically by last name. Following the opening comments, we'll have a period of questions and answers with the candidates. The questions were developed with input from the Burnaby Board of Trade members and based on priority areas for the Burnaby business community. I'll direct the questions to each candidate and give you up to 1 minute and 15 seconds to respond. We want to have a discussion with each of you as opposed to a debate, so the candidates have been asked not to interrupt or speak over one another's comments. So that's the guidelines. Hopefully everybody understands that and we're all clear on where we're going today. So we're going to start off with Terry Beach, representing the Liberal Party. Terry, welcome, and your 2 minutes begins now.
Well, hi, my name is Terry Beach and I'm your Liberal candidate for Burnaby North-Seymour. I'm happy to be joining you from my home office, actually, which is on the traditional territory of the Musqueam, Squamish and Tsleil-Waututh people. I've had the pleasure of serving as your Member of Parliament for the last 6 years and serving also as the Parliamentary Secretary to Science, Transport, Fisheries and Oceans, the Canadian Coast Guard, Official Languages, and most recently, Economic Development for British Columbia. I have a twin brother and a younger sister who is a nurse. And before I was a Member of Parliament, I was a small business owner and an educator. I taught primarily finance and entrepreneurship at SFU and UBC. But my first enterprise was actually a nonprofit organization called Twinbro. And for more than 10 years, we went from school to school throughout BC, teaching tens of thousands of students how to win scholarships to access a post-secondary education. I got into politics primarily to help people. I'm very interested in social mobility and building pathways for people to find success. So in 2015, I ran on a platform to grow our economy by investing in the middle class. This approach has proven quite successful. Prior to the pandemic, we created more than 1 million jobs while lowering our country's debt servicing costs to 100-year lows. At the same time, we invested in fighting climate change and creating Canada's first national housing strategy. We reduced poverty and unemployment to all-time historic lows, and we made Canada the most connected trading nation in the world. When the pandemic hit, we used our strong financial position and AAA credit rating to finance the cost of the pandemic, so small businesses and families didn't have to. Over the last 18 months, Canada has witnessed one of the most adaptive and entrepreneurial governments in Canada's history, successfully saving thousands of businesses and millions of jobs. We've also managed to make Canada one of the most vaccinated countries in the world and now have turned our attention to building a strong economic recovery. I sincerely believe that our platform is the best plan for Canada in both the short and longer term, and I look forward to having the opportunity to discuss these plans with you in greater detail today.
Thank you, Terry. By my watch, that was spot on 2 minutes. So thank you. We appreciate that. Next up, I'll invite Jim Hanson with the New Democrat Party. Jim, your 2 minutes is going to begin now.
Thank you very much. For those of you I have not had the pleasure to meet in person, I'm Jim Hanson. And by way of a very brief introduction, I'm a 2-term councillor in the District of North Vancouver. By profession, I'm a lawyer and I have law degrees from both the University of British Columbia and Oxford University in England. I'm married to my spouse, Ruth Hanson. We've been married for over 25 years and we have 2 adult children. We live in the Seymour community where I was born and raised, but for 12 years of our marriage, we lived in North Burnaby where my spouse was born and raised. During the last several weeks, I have spoken to hundreds and hundreds of voters, and I believe that the Trudeau government has failed our community. They promised us a climate action plan, and yet they gave us a bitumen pipeline, government owned, that spills out bitumen right here in our home community with expanded tanker terminals and expanded tanks in our increasingly hot and earthquake prone community. They promised us a national housing strategy, and yet under Trudeau, housing costs have gone up 50%, tearing our families apart in some cases, including mine. And the National Pharmacare, promised National Pharmacare program never materialized. And I have met voters that have said they have to choose between pharmaceutical drugs and necessary expenses. I'm proud to run with Jagmeet Singh and the NDP because we have a real plan to address these issues, and we will live up to our promises. A strong climate action plan, real housing affordability for people right here in our community. Better is possible, and I'm proud to stand with Jagmeet Singh and the NDP and offering a better vision for our community. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jim. 2 minutes again. Thank you. We appreciate that. Next up, I'll introduce Brad Nickerson with the People's Party. Brad, your 2 minutes begins now.
Thank you, Paul. I appreciate being invited today. I obviously come from the party that's going to be regarded as a bit of the skunk at the picnic. So I appreciate this opportunity to have our point of view heard. By way of my background, and I am completely new to politics, is that I was born and raised in a small city on the northwest of British Columbia, known as on the western edge of what is known as the Great Bear Rainforest. The name of the city is Prince Rupert. It's also the traditional home of the Tsimshian Nation. In addition to its astonishing natural beauty and being adjacent to the largest population of grizzly bears anywhere in the world, Prince Rupert is also conspicuous for two things. It gets more rain than any city in Canada, up to 100 inches a year. And among Canadian cities with a population of 5,000 or more, Prince Rupert has the highest percentage of residents who has First Nations, who identify as First Nations. Nearly 40% of Prince Rupert is residents are First Nations. While I settled permanently in North Burnaby in my early 20s, having first moved into this area to attend Simon Fraser University, Prince Rupert and its people have always remained close to my heart. And not just because it's such an amazing place for me to grow up, but also because it's a special place and a place with deep history and no small amount of sorrow because of that history. Flawed government policies have left a deep wound on the people who first inhabited this northern land, wind, sea, and forests. I knew this as a boy, and I know it now. History is also happening to us now. Our nation is going through the greatest crisis, at least since the 1930s and 40s. It is my view and the view of my party that it's time to admit the terrible economic ignorance behind the COVID trade-offs and phase out the unnecessary application of non-pharmaceutical intervention, or NPIs, on businesses and the general economy. A peer-reviewed study conducted by Stanford University researchers analyzed the coronavirus case growth in 10 countries in 2020 and showed there was no clear significant beneficial effect of more restrictive measures on case growth in any country. To support businesses in their recovery and rebuilding out of the controlled demolition caused by what is perhaps the most flawed and damaging public policy decisions ever made will require a World War II level effort. I'm done.
Thank you, Brad. Appreciate it. Thanks for coming today. And now, finally, we have Kelsey Shane with the Conservative Party. Kelsey, your 2 minutes.
Hi, everyone, and thank you for having us today. My name is Kelsey Shane, and I'm your federal Conservative candidate here in Burnaby North-Seymour. I'm born in Burnaby, I live in Burnaby, and I've been knocking on doors for the last 3 months in Burnaby. So I'm going to share some of the experiences and stories I've collected over the last couple of months and talk a little bit today about Canada's recovery plan. It's the plan put forward by Erin O'Toole and Canada's Conservatives to make sure that Canada has a bright and optimistic future out of this pandemic. So by nature, I'm going to introduce myself briefly here. I've owned and operated our family's small business on the North Shore, which is Menchie's Frozen Yogurt, in 2012. And I worked during that time to start the Lower Lonsdale Business Association. I went door to door speaking to small business owners, asking their opinion about what building a shipyards district would look like in our community. Following that, I really felt connected to local politics. Being able to listen to folks and take advocacy for the things that mattered to develop vibrancy in our communities was something that I got a dose of and I was never going to give up. So from there through university, I worked on campaigns. I volunteered as a grassroots organizer, and I really learned how to give a voice to those who need to be heard. Following that, I moved to Ottawa, where I worked for a couple of MPs. I worked for the Canadian Medical Association, where I traveled coast to coast, working with physicians, medical students, patients, listening to their advocacy issues, and using the mechanisms of government to help develop effective advocacy plans to fight for the things that mattered for them. In 2019, I felt, though, very frustrated with this government's approach. And I think I want to do better. I want a government that listens to its people, not the other way around. And so I put my name on the ballot. And since then, I've had a real tremendous opportunity to listen to people and really understand that I believe Canada's recovery plan is the right plan. And so I really look forward to talking about some of the things that we're going to do here today: securing the economy, securing jobs, securing mental health, because these are the things that really matter to our community. Thank you.
Thank you, Kelsey. Appreciate it. And thanks to all four of you for being here today and for respecting the time that we've been allocating to everybody. We have a few different areas that I think we shared with you that we'd like to chat about today. I'm going to basically do a question in each area. And then if we have time towards the end, we'll dive a bit deeper into some of those. The first one that I'd like to ask you about is during the pandemic, government support such as the wage subsidy and the commercial rent subsidy have been lifelines for many Burnaby businesses. What are your thoughts on how these programs were rolled out so far? What should be the future of these and other COVID support programs for businesses? For the first question, we'll do the same order that we just did. So Terry, we'll start with you.
Well, thanks for the question. Our government is committed to doing whatever it takes to assist families and businesses through the pandemic. We created more than 100 unique programs that didn't exist only 18 months ago. And these measures have worked. We have recovered 93% of pre-COVID jobs in Canada, while the United States has only recovered 75%. In BC, we've recovered more than 100%, and we are poised to lead the Canadian recovery. Tens of thousands of businesses have been saved. Millions of people have been able to be maintained as employees. Our success is tied directly to our science-based policy that put the health of Canadians first. Our recovery has meant that employers need more workers. And in order to address this, we are expanding the Canada hiring program so that businesses have the resources they need to hire back employees and recruit new ones. And we're creating a labor mobility tax credit, and we're doubling the union trading fund. Our government has been focused on making sure our entire country has had access to the world's best vaccines, and that has allowed the province of BC to start requiring proof of vaccinations as of today, which will allow many businesses to operate at pre-pandemic levels. At the same time, we are investing in childcare so that young women can contribute to the economy like never before, and pharmacare so that our population is healthy and has access to the medicines they need.
Thank you, Terry. Jim, let's come to you next.
Thank you very much for the question. The historical record is clear that during COVID, the NDP pushed the Liberals in the House of Commons to provide the necessary supports to small business and employees of those businesses. In terms of the philosophy of the NDP, we stand behind small business and we stand behind employees. And we will pursue a taxation structure which provides relief to small business, while at the same time focusing taxation on those with very large net worths, large incomes, and large corporations. Our pharmacare program will provide relief to small business because they'll be relieved of some of the extended healthcare cost expenses. And I'll note that the Liberal promise of pharmacare is something like the Liberal promise of proportional representation. These promises from the Liberals simply can't be relied upon. There's also specific platforms in the NDP policy, CPP and EI for new hires during COVID. And more broadly, we will stand behind small business and their employees and ensure that through the remainder of this crisis, they get the support they need to keep our communities safe, sound, and whole. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jim. Brad, you're up next.
Are you asking me what I think of the response by governments to a problem they created?
Well, I was asking the thoughts on how the programs have been rolled out in terms of wage subsidy, commercial rent subsidy, and other lifelines, and what should be the future of these supports.
Okay. So these programs were in response to locking down the economy, fracturing supply chains, forced closing of viable businesses, driving millions into unemployment, and burdening business owners with a whole host of revenue-suppressing rules and restrictions. As I stated earlier, there was never a valid predicate for the lockdowns in the first place. Public health care policy has been driven by a dodgy black box modeling, anecdotes, and morbidity and mortality data absent any meaningful context to evaluate its significance. According to data from the BC CDC, COVID-19 is a contagion with a survival rate of 99.54% for British Columbians over age 85. I have the data. And 99.99% for those under age 65, which is the working age and school age population. A key problem that businesses are now encountering is attracting and retaining skilled staff with jobs going begging. It seems prudent to start phasing out our government's income support programs, which provide an incentive for people not to work. This, after all, is neoclassical microeconomic theory 101. A medium-term problem is that after 18 months, a great many workers have been desocialized from work. Drug and alcohol abuse has increased sharply, as have other chronic medical conditions. These represent a largely hidden epidemic lurking behind these ill-conceived policies. Returning many of these workers to structured gainful employment can be akin to the rehabilitation and vocational challenges faced in trauma recovery. This will require multidisciplinary public and private sector response. Given all that, the government support programs have been adequate for most workers, less so for businesses.
Thank you, Brad. Kelsey, over to you.
Hey, all right. So I'm going to talk about this as from the perspective of somebody who's had to run a small business during the pandemic. It was really challenging to get the programs working. But I think what this election is really about is about the future. So we've got a handful of policies that are really going to be focusing on getting our economy back on track. But I'm going to spend my 60 seconds or so left talking about one in particular, and that's our Canada Job Surge Plan. So our plan is following the CEWS wage subsidy programs, is to do the Canada Job Surge. So what this is going to be is for folks who are out of work. We want to give the employers a 50% of the salary for new hires. We need to get people back to work. This is really the key of our plan. We need people working in all sectors because that is how our economy is going to run. So I can speak from my own personal experience that it was very, very difficult to keep people employed during this pandemic for a couple of different reasons. One is that folks were earning a government salary sitting at home, but it was very, very difficult for businesses to continue to employ staff. And so we really want the workplace to be vibrant and working again. And so for that reason, we want people who have been out of work, especially for more than a year, to be able to rejoin the economy, get back to work, and get our economy on track.
Thank you, Kelsey. The next question is on the environment, and I'll start, Jim, with you on the next question. For many, the impacts of climate change were brought into focus this summer with some of the extreme heat conditions that we saw here in BC, including devastating wildfires. What do you think should be the focus for the next federal government in terms of addressing climate change and mitigating its effects on people, the economy, and our communities? Jim, your minute and 15 seconds begins.
Thank you very much. It is obvious as I go door to door and person to person, voter to voter across this riding, that climate change is an absolutely top priority. Our summers are increasingly hot, our rainfalls are increasingly intense. This has become an emergency that we all must confront. In the face of this, the Trudeau government has no credibility whatsoever. Their strategy is to buy a national pipeline to export fossil fuels from Canada. What we need to do is develop a green economy. I've been a councillor in the district for 7 years, and we've developed a philosophy of looking at policy through a climate lens, recognizing that policy is not successful if we all exterminate ourselves due to heat and extreme weather. So what we need to do, instead of making these billions of dollars of investments in bitumen exports, we need investments in green energy. And I look forward to being part of that solution with Jagmeet Singh and an NDP.
Thank you, Jim. Brad, can we come to you next?
Other than repairing the damage caused by the COVID response public policy debacle, climate change is without question the greatest crisis facing us today, but it is a crisis that appears to contain two parts. The first part is an environmental crisis, and this crisis is visceral and very real. The second part is a political crisis. Official pronouncements are at once contradictory and often incoherent, leaving in the minds of many responsible, informed people two questions: what's the plan, and how to meet the challenge of the environmental crisis without doing permanent long damage to the Canadian economy. Canada has many natural advantages when it comes to energy, including abundant, clean, renewable hydroelectric power, while also being the world's largest producer of uranium. Our solutions to the climate crisis should, like China's, be nationally determined. China is not a signatory to the Paris Accords, as we all know. Our solutions should involve and employ Canadians in both planning and execution of whatever is decided we do moving forward.
Thank you, Brad. Kelsey, can we come to you?
Hi. Well, I gotta say, I really appreciate the way that you frame that question, because this is the way people tell it to me on the doors as well. I think how we adapt to the climate crisis in a very real way is top of mind for people. We know this summer was dangerous. The heat domes we had and the forest fires we had were real and affected not only people here in Burnaby and North-Seymour, but also in the interior all across British Columbia. So, I mean, an election was really the last thing on people's minds. And I hear this every day, that people are furious that we're in an election instead of seeing a federal government response on this. And so that's why I'm really proud to be speaking about our climate adaptation policy. So we're not only talking about reducing Canada's emissions with some of our key pieces, like the personal low carbon savings account, which I think will encourage Canadians to make their own better, greener choices. But on the other sense, from Ottawa, we need a response there. So we are going to name a national climate disaster officer into the Privy Council office and work to develop a new climate adaptation strategy so that we have plans for future heat disasters or climate disasters. And this is something that is critical for the well-being in a very real way, because this is what the federal government ought to be doing, is being prepared for these things. You know, this summer we heard that the guidance from the provincial and federal government was check on your loved ones. That is not a good enough plan, because I can tell you, we were checking on our loved ones and they weren't doing well. We need action, and people are tired of empty promises.
Thank you, Kelsey. Terry, over to you.
Well, British Columbians understand that without a healthy environment, it's impossible to have a healthy economy. Our government has done more to cut pollution in a practical and affordable way than any other government in Canadian history. Our strengthened climate plan has been praised by economists, environmentalists, and experts from across the political spectrum. Thomas Mulcair, former leader of the NDP, called our plan absolutely marvelous. Andrew Weaver, former leader of the BC Green Party and a climate scientist himself, has said that our plan is the only credible plan put forward by any party at the federal level. And Mark Jacquard, an energy economist right here from SFU, has given all of our climate plans a score of 10. The Liberal plan received the highest score of 8 out of 10, while the NDP's climate plan was billed as extremely costly and largely ineffective, thus a score of 2 out of 10. In addition, we are protecting our old growth forests, recovering our wild salmon, implementing a southern resident killer whale recovery strategy, and have an aggressive plan to tackle plastic pollution. The Conservatives have fought every piece of environmental legislation we have passed over the last 6 years and are looking to repeal all this progress we have made on climate change, starting in BC by repealing the oil tanker moratorium and restarting construction on an oil pipeline through the Great Bear Rainforest.
Thank you, Terry. The next question I'm going to ask is on the subject of childcare, and Brad, will come to you first on this one. For many years, the Burnaby Board of Trade has argued that childcare is not simply a family issue or a women's issue, but an economic issue, allowing more parents to join the labour force and helping women in particular to fulfil their economic potential. What is your position on the role of the federal government in addressing the dual challenge of both finding childcare spots and then making them affordable for families? Brad, over to you, please, first.
I'm sorry, how long?
1 minute and 15 seconds.
I'll do my best. As we all know, on August 7th, a new deal was announced between BC and Canadian governments that will provide $10 a day daycare for all regulated childcare spaces for children under 6 by the end of the 5-year agreement. This is going to involve a 50% reduction in average patient fees by 2022, and it's supposed to look to the creation of 30,000 newly regulated learning and childcare spaces for children under the age of 6 within 5 years, and 40,000 spaces within 7 years. This is going to be a community investment in long-term facilities by public and run by public and nonprofit institutions. The problem is that currently some childcare facilities have a wait list of up to 2.5 years, the median being 12 to 18 months. Children only need daycare for 3 to 4 years of their life before kindergarten kicks in, so the new spots in daycare are not helping any parent that has a child right now. Currently, the average cost for daycare is at least $1,200 a month and as high as $1,600 a month. The stated goal is to have this down by 50% by the end of 22, but the new fee structure kicks in before the new spaces are open. So it means very little to those trying to find daycare for their child currently. As a result, many parents looking for daycare for their child today, the situation remains desperate. This is not a new problem. It's been going on for decades. Meanwhile, the lack of a bridging plan until the early and childcare learning programs can be made fully operational remains a glaring omission. If the federal government can find $30 million in recovery funds to give to undisclosed recipients in the Canadian media, then they can do something about a bridging plan.
Thank you, Brad. Kelsey, let's go to you next.
Hey, all right. So I believe the federal government's role can be immediate. So what we Conservatives propose is that we will shift the Canada Child expense deduction into a refundable tax credit for covering up to 75% of the cost of childcare. This is something that can take action almost immediately and will help low-income families as soon as elected. And this is a very, very distinct difference from the Liberal plan, which has been being promised for 40 years. This has been 10 elections that they've promised to get childcare done. This is a huge broken promise, and I really caution folks who might be believing that the Liberals are going to get it done this time, because to me, it really does look like a future broken promise. I think Canada's Conservatives' action is honest, and it will happen immediately. This helps low-income families, and this moves money fast, quickly for families who need it now, not in 10 years or not in another 40 years.
Thank you, Kelsey. Terry, over to you.
Well, investing in accessible and affordable early learning and childcare is not just good for our kids, it's great for our economy too. That is why boards of trade and chambers of commerce across the country have endorsed our plan. In BC, this will mean an immediate reduction in childcare costs of 50% within the first year, dropping from an average of $60 a day to $30 a day and moving to $10 a day by 2025. It also means the creation of 40,000 new spaces, 12,000 of those within the next year. The Conservative plan is to tear up this deal with the province that's already been signed, create no new spaces, and provide a refundable tax credit that won't significantly help the average family. Economists suggest that for every dollar we invest into childcare, we expect to see a $3 addition to the economy. So our plan has the following benefits. It creates a new generation of super kids ready to get a jump start with their education. It employs thousands of childcare providers. It creates new spaces for families and lowers wait lists. And it creates flexibility for families and especially mothers, closing the gender gap and empowering a generation of women to continue their careers uninterrupted if they choose to do so. It is a win-win-win, and we need to make sure it is fully implemented.
Thank you, Terry. Jim, over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I've made many statements as a counselor and in my other political life as to the benefits of childcare. And as Terry mentioned, it clearly is a win-win-win. It's good for the economy, it's good for social equity, and it's long overdue. The BC NDP has made important strides around childcare, but they require federal collaboration, partnership, to achieve this important policy goal for the good of our economy and of our families. The NDP supports $10 a day daycare and has a tangible plan for how to get there. And in British Columbia, that will involve working in partnership with our BC NDP colleagues whose commitment to childcare is very, very clear. The challenge with the Liberal plan is that the Liberals, Trudeau just simply can't be trusted. He's made so many statements of specific promises, and he doesn't live up to them. So we can't put any stock whatsoever in the Liberal plan for childcare. The NDP's plan is clear: $10 a day childcare, working with all levels of government to achieve this important policy mandate. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. The next question I'd like to come on to, the next category to come on to, and we'll start with Kelsey on this one, is housing affordability. A top concern of Burnaby businesses, big and small, is the cost of housing. For them, they see its impacts on the labour force as it becomes harder to find workers as they have to live further afield, and those they can find need higher wages to afford housing. The middle ground of housing, supports for working class, middle income Canadians, is a priority for us here at the Burnaby Board of Trade, as these people are often ineligible for many housing supports due to their income levels, but are not able to find housing easily at full market value. What do you think can or should be done to address the housing affordability issues in Burnaby and the Lower Mainland? Kelsey, let's start with you.
Sure. So I'm really happy to speak to housing affordability. This is something that I talk about with people on the doors almost every single day. So ours is going to be a supply and demand based model. So basically, we want to build 1 million new homes in 3 years. It's a lofty and ambitious goal, and we think it's critical to get actual homes supplied so that people can live in them. So the way to do this is a couple of different ways. We want to free up 15% of federal crown land to become mid-density housing. We also want to do a freeze on foreign buyers to get the market under control. And then the other thing is there is currently 100,000 jobs available in building trades. So we want to double the Canada apprenticeship program so that folks can start careers and work in building trades to get building. And so this is our plan. It is a detailed plan that works understanding our economy and understanding that people need actual places to live. So this is really what we're going to do. We're going to get people back to work building, and we're going to get housing built.
Thank you, Kelsey. Terry, over to you next.
Well, the federal government has been out of housing for more than a generation, but fortunately, since 2015, our government has put forward an aggressive $72 billion national housing strategy, and most parties now support some form of a housing strategy, which is a good thing. Generation Squeeze assessed all of the party platforms against the goal of having Canadians have an affordable place to live by 2030. The Liberal plan scored the highest with a 6.6. The Greens at 3.75 was the second. The NDP was third with 3.4. And far behind was the Conservative plan, which scored only a 2.5. Why do we score almost 3 times higher than the Conservatives? The short answer is because our plan was designed by experts. We're investing in the entire housing continuum, as well as infrastructure around housing like transportation, and our platform focuses on 3 key areas. The first is building more supply. The second is to taper demand, primarily by disincentivizing the use of housing as an investment vehicle instead of as a place to live. And the third is to provide a viable path to home ownership to a starter home so that renters can start to build equity. I'd encourage everyone to read our 30-point plan to accomplish this. It's available at liberal.ca/housing.
Thank you, Terry. Jim, over to you.
Thank you very much. I want to start by emphasizing how this issue is directly affecting me in my life. My very own family, I have a 23-year-old and a 25-year-old, and they're unable to afford housing in our community, which creates a situation where I may not have my grandchildren growing up close to me. Families are being torn apart. I'm also a businessman. My law firm employs 7 people, 8 including myself, and we face an extreme pressure of affordability. People can't live near our business in North Vancouver, and of course transportation options are challenging. The NDP have a real plan to build 500,000 affordable units, genuinely affordable units. I don't believe we can let the market solve this problem, because the market seems to just produce more and more million-dollar condos and not affordable units. We're also calling for a 20% foreign buyers tax to take some of the speculative money out of real estate. And as in so many policy areas, we need collaboration at different levels of government, local, provincial governments. We need access to federal lands and local government lands to create housing right here in our community people can afford. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Brad, over to you next, please.
The challenges relating to housing affordability in Burnaby and the entire Lower Mainland, and for those who live, attend school, and work here, is not resolvable, at least not until we face up honestly and courageously to the elephant in the room, money laundering. British Columbia has become a global hub for money laundering by transnational organized crime syndicates. How many empty homes are there in Burnaby and in the Lower Mainland? Do we even know? What's the point of greenlighting massive new housing initiatives if the increased housing stock will either be obscenely unaffordable or simply unavailable to the average buyer? We cannot wait for the outcome of the current Cullen Commission inquiry into money laundering in British Columbia, well intended though it may be. What I propose is the establishment of a dedicated interagency federal task force made up of resources gathered from various agencies, including RCMP, Border Security Services, FinTrack, and the Federal Prosecution Service. We also require the Canadian Parliament to enact laws relevant to enforcement, prosecution, and punishment in today's globalized integrated world of organized crime. These new laws would likely need to be similar in construction and purpose to the RICO Act in the United States.
Thank you, Brad. The next area to look at is generally the economy, and through its impacts on healthcare and the economy, and through the cost of support programs, the pandemic has cost the federal government hundreds of billions of dollars. What are your thoughts on how this specific bill gets paid in the future? And more broadly, what do you think is the appropriate role of government spending in the economy? To what degree are you concerned about the level of deficits and debt in Canada? Terry, can we start with you on that one, please?
Sure. Liberals have been hands down the best fiscal managers in the country for the last 2 generations. Prior to the pandemic, we lowered our debt servicing costs to 100-year lows and maintained a rare AAA credit rating. We lowered poverty and unemployment to all-time historic lows while creating 1 million jobs and growing the economy. This approach allowed us to invest in significant programs like infrastructure, fighting climate change, and reconciliation. Once the pandemic hit, we leveraged our strong financial position to ensure the cost of the pandemic wasn't carried by individual businesses or households on credit cards. Going forward, we're going to continue to reduce our country's debt to servicing costs. Our approach means we'll leave the pandemic with the lowest debt to GDP ratio in the G7, just like we entered it. Be in a position to grow the economy and invest in important programs like childcare and pharmacare that help grow the economy over time. And this is a sharp contrast to the Conservatives. The last 2 Conservative governments accounted for 75% of the total debt accrued in our first 150 years as a country, all while cutting taxes for the wealthy and slowing economic growth. Based on purely economic measures, our platform is better for people, better for the middle class, better for business, and better for the Canadian economy.
Thank you, Terry. Jim, over to you next.
Thank you very much. Yes, I am concerned about the size of the debt. All responsible people would be. It has an impact, a potential impact on our economy and future generations. And we need to make sure that we have realistic revenue plans to ensure that this debt will get paid off. The Liberals, Trudeau has given the pandemic profiteers a free ride, taken no steps to ensure that those who are growing rich off the suffering of others during this pandemic are forced to account through any kind of taxation plan. The NDP has come forward with a fully costed and realistic taxation plan that will tax those with the most to give, those with net worths over $10 million, a 1% annual tax. Those with incomes over $216,000 a year will pay a little bit more in income tax, and large corporations who have done so well during this pandemic. And close the loopholes too. The Liberals, Trudeau does nothing to close the loopholes on his wealthy business elite friends. What we need is a realistic taxation plan that ensures that we have the revenue necessary to pay off and to pay for social services and secure our financial future. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Brad, can we come to you next, please?
Yes, it is astonishing that the Bank of Canada, a federal crown corporation, has taken on liabilities of nearly $500 billion to support federal government spending in its COVID response. That said, it's still important to know, however, that Canada is a monetary sovereign. What this means is the Canadian federal government holds a monopoly in the creation of Canadian dollars. It therefore can never run out of them. If the government's liabilities are in Canadian dollars, its solvency, its ability to pay its liabilities is never in peril. This would not be the case if its liabilities were in other countries' currency, for example, US dollars. The problem arises when the federal government initiates a vast increase in the supply of money in the general economy that's out of balance with the real growth in the economy. When we experience a huge relative increase in dollars compared to the available goods and services in the economy, the price of goods and services bid up, leading to inflation. High inflation will erode the purchasing power of most Canadians, especially the most vulnerable. The only way out of a debt-driven inflationary trap is by growing the real economy, thereby increasing the supply of goods and services by investing in viable, productive enterprises, innovation, and higher education skills training, leading to better paying jobs and even more investment to meet growing consumer demand. while the Bank of Canada can keep printing money to support the government spending for as long as it may like, we all know where that ship must stop.
Thank you, Brad. Kelsey, over to you.
Hi. So I want to let folks know and remind people that Canada's Conservatives got us out of the last recession, and we will do the same with this one. So we are the only party that has a plan to balance the budget within 10 years. We will do 1 year of continued post-pandemic recovery spending, and then we're going to rein things in to get things back to balance. Now, I think our key to balancing the economy, growing the economy, it's all around jobs. So we need to get people back to work. We're going to create 1 million jobs. And I just want to highlight one of our programs that I think the members of the Burnaby Board of Trade might be interested in hearing more about. And that is our Dine and Discover program that we're going to launch. So we are going to provide a 50% rebate for food and non-alcoholic drinks for Canadians from Monday to Wednesday, once it's safe to do so, so that people can go discover and dine in Canada. This will pump $1 billion into our economy, including small businesses here in Burnaby, up in North Vancouver. These are the kind of innovative programs that will not only put people back to work, but put cash back into our economy to start to grow our economy so that we can return to balance in a responsible manner, which is going to be in 10 years' time.
Thank you, Kelsey. I think we've probably got time for one more question, and I'll come to you first on this one, Jim. Inflation in Canada was up 3.7% year over year in July, the biggest increase in a decade. For businesses, the costs of their inputs and raw materials are going up, and in turn, eventually the cost they charge consumers must increase as well. And as costs for consumers increase, that puts downward pressure on discretionary spending and upward pressure on wage costs for businesses. What are your concerns around inflation and the general cost of living in Burnaby? And what is your message to voters who are finding the cost of everyday life going up? Jim, starting with you, please.
Yeah, thank you very much. And you're absolutely right. When I go door to door and as I speak to voters, things are getting more expensive. Working families are finding it harder to make ends meet. NDP platform policies such as pharmacare will assist, increased federal minimum wage, and other support programs. But fundamentally on the inflation point, we need to make sure that we have a fiscal policy that provides structure and balance to our economy. And that means we need to balance taxation and revenue against spending. And the NDP is the only party that's come forward and said, you know what, the rich should pay a little bit more. And when I go door to door, that's a message that's very well received. We have a high degree of disparity in our culture between those that just make more and more money and those that find themselves left out. What we need is taxation reform to ensure that the government has the funds necessary to address the social issues without just mounting up in ever-increasing debt. And there are many examples of NDP governments that have pursued those policies. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jim. Brad, can we come to you next?
Yes, Paul, thank you. In addition to the cost of living, it's important to remember that Statistics Canada has just revised its latest reading on GDP, highlighting a contraction of 1.1% at an annualized rate in the second quarter, well below the 2.5% expansion that it originally forecast. It's a big miss, and one does not bode very well. And with the consumer price index rising, the highest level seen in years, as you mentioned, the Canadian economy is currently suffering a bout of 1970 style stagflation. A perfect storm is looming, and the Bank of Canada isn't a wind farm. Meanwhile, the I don't think about the monetary policy Trudeau government plays deaf, dumb, and blind on the magnitude of the looming crisis. We also must keep in mind that even before the crisis began, Canadian households and non-financial corporations were carrying the highest debt loads among G7 countries.
Thank you, Brad. Kelsey, coming to you.
Hi, so yeah, everything is more expensive right now. Inflation is a tax on all of us. And I hear this constantly, right? There is less money at the end of every month for people to either go for a meal or take a trip or do something that they'd like to do. So everything is more expensive and people have less money to spend every month. Even with people who own their homes feel this way. So I think we're doing a couple things to lower the cost of living and to make affordability key here. So one thing, when it comes to groceries, we are going to stiffen the fines for price fixing. This is an important piece. We are going to reduce internet and cell phone bills by encouraging more competition and discouraging competitive practices of the telecom companies. But then I want to talk about one more thing we're going to do to give Canadians a break this year, and that's our Gst Holiday. So for the month of December, you will not pay GST on local retail purchases. This is something that will not only allow businesses to earn a little bit more local income, but it will give Canadians a break, because we recognize how much taxes really burden folks who are just trying to get by. And so anything we can do to try and ease that burden is going to be really critical. So Gst Holiday is one of these innovative policies we're talking about that makes it both a little easier for Canadians to get by the holiday season and pushes money into our local economy here in Burnaby.
Thank you, Kelsey. And Terry, over to you.
Affordability is a huge issue. I write a quarterly report on affordability. Would request that everybody take a look at it at terrybeach.ca. And of course, one of the unique drivers of inflation recently has been the increasing shipping costs, which I know is something that's important to the Burnaby Board of Trade. The average cost of a container has risen dramatically from lows of about $3,500 a container up to $25,000 to $30,000. The marginal impact on everything from consumer goods to raw materials is staggering, as it is increasing the costs incurred by Canadian exporters as well. Our government has invested significantly in the National Trade Corridor Fund in order to relieve domestic bottlenecks and collect the data so that we can ensure that our infrastructure dollars are going to the right place. But the rising cost of shipping is a unique challenge, especially when our government has done so much to increase access to global markets. The extraordinary pricing is certainly here for the short term or to medium term, as the pandemic has placed a giant wrench in an otherwise very efficient global logistics network. While this is a significant problem in many industries, it might also be an opportunity for an aggressive North American domestic manufacturing strategy. This might also be in an area that Pacifican, BC's new economic development agency, can look at, as Vancouver is Canada's largest port by a significant margin, and there may be ways to both alleviate the pain in the short term while addressing new opportunities caused by the disruption in supply.
Thank you, Terry, and thank you to all of you. We really appreciate you joining us today for this really insightful and important discussion with our candidates in the Burnaby North-Seymour riding. I'd like to thank you as well for putting yourselves forward as candidates for the federal election. Public service is an important part of our society, and all of you should be commended for stepping up to put your name forward to serve the public. I encourage everyone to get out and vote. You can vote at your assigned polling station on election day, Monday, September the 20th. Polls will be open for 12 hours on election day. For more information on how to vote, you can visit elections.ca or you can call 1-800-463-6868. Terry, Jim, Brad, Kelsey, thank you very much for joining us here today.